this topic, which I think is one of the most important topics with respect to any kind of vitamins or any kind of supplementation, because this is sort of the basis of so much with respect to health, not just bone health, which is usually how most people think about this important vitamin, which is none other than calcitriol or vitamin D. Vitamin D3 or cholecalciferol is the one that we want. We want to have optimal levels, not just a baseline, okay level, kind of how the lab would say it. In fact, I just read a study and it really bummed me out. It was that 48% of people, according to the study, had a low vitamin D, but their baseline for low was 20 nanograms. 20 nanograms per deciliter, which is really, really low. In fact, they said that over 20 nanograms per ml, sorry, I might have said something, deciliter, I think I said, but it's nanograms per ml. They said that over 20, any level over 20, including 30, would be considered normal. And I disagree with that. Maybe normal by the blood test, but you don't want to be normal in this respect. And this is something that goes for many lab tests, including a fasting glucose, a fasting insulin. When you get these done, you don't just want to be normal, because right now, normal here, especially at home in the US, is far from optimal. Normal means that 70 some odd percent of us are overweight. Normal means that over 50% of us have either high blood sugar or borderline type 2 diabetes. This is not what we want. We do not want to be normal. We want to be optimal. So I will talk about what I really feel like ideal level should be. And my baseline is sort of 60. I want people to be 60 nanograms per ml and above. And that's more of what I would consider a normal, sort of healthy, optimal level. And if you look at that and look at the statistics with respect to that, it's almost 9 out of 10 of us that do not have levels in this range, optimal vitamin D levels over 60 nanograms per ml. And so we're going to talk about why that is. We're going to talk about what it does. We're going to talk about why vitamin D is so dang critical, crucial, and important, not just for your bones, but for all the things. We're going to talk about why it is so important to get a test done. If you haven't ever done it, you need to know what's under the hood, right? You got to check under the hood. If you're going to send your car off to the mechanic, they got to look under the hood and see what's happening with us, with our human body. You can't just guess this stuff. If you have a reasonable suntan, like maybe you do right now at the end of summer, that doesn't guarantee you have a sufficient level of vitamin D. You may think that you do, and it may help to get some sunshine. And I always recommend it because sunshine is so helpful for our brain health and just for our mood, and it's great to be outdoors. And I try to get a little sunshine myself, but there's actually a lot of data showing that, especially not only in darker skinned people, they have trouble converting the vitamin D to the active level, getting that vitamin D3, which is what our cells need. They actually struggle to do that, even if they're very tan people, and those like me that aren't so tan, that are trying to have a little bit of a healthy, coloring to my skin. Mostly, I don't care about the coloring, I care about the vitamin D. But after age 40, which I'm about a decade past that, you guys know I entered my 50th year just a few months ago, and my levels may not be ideal, even though I'm getting plenty of sun. So I always supplement. I for sure do at least half the year. I may start to supplement as well in the summer. In fact, I haven't checked a recent level. My last one I checked in the winter time. And now I'm going to start checking twice a year based on the new data that I was reviewing just prior to this podcast that I'm going to share with you. So vitamin D3 is what you want to check, which is, it's a pretty easy test. It should be pretty affordable. I just want to see there was something I found I wanted to share with you about it. And anyway, I'm not finding it at the moment, but basically I was recommending that we don't just be quote unquote normal, which is above 20 or 30 nanograms per ml. We should be more optimal in the 60 to 70, maybe 60 to 80 range on our vitamin D. And that's just measuring the 25 hydroxy vitamin D level, which is the vitamin D3, 25 hydroxy vitamin D. You got to get that measured. It can be done. I was looking up a reference for where you could get it done for, even if your doctor won't order it. Like if you ask your doc, hey doc, I want to get a vitamin D level, I want to get a fasting insulin, which I think are two of the most underused, underappreciated tests, which really speak volumes to your health status. And most docs don't do it. So these are tests that you should be getting at least twice a year. or at least do a baseline if you've never done that, fasting insulin and also a vitamin D level, the 25-hydroxy vitamin D. And if you can't get your doc to order it, there's a couple of resources. You can reach out to me. There's a lab. I was looking over here in my readings, one called ZRT Labs, and this is still available. Today, you can sign up and get them to do that test, or if you need help with that, you can email me or message me and we can figure out how to get that done, because it's super important. You need to check under the hood. You just can't guess, even if you've been living in Florida or Hawaii, where I am currently, and you think you got enough because you're getting sunshine in the summer. You may not, because especially over age 40, or if you're a darker skinned person in general, it's just harder to get your body to convert that into the active form of the vitamin D3, cholecalciferol, that you need to do all of those things. In fact, well, let's just review a little bit what the heck vitamin D, the so-called sunshine vitamin, really does. And it's actually quite different than most vitamins. This is a fat-soluble vitamin, but not just like any fat-soluble one like A or E. This one is very specific. It's actually made from cholesterol. So you may have heard me share about how cholesterol is not the killer that we've always assigned it to be. It's causing us to clog our blood vessels, get heart attacks and strokes. Not so fast. Cholesterol is critical, not only to our brain, which is made up largely of cholesterol, but also vitamin D is made from cholesterol. So we need vitamin D. And I get it often. As you know, I eat plenty of eggs, and we can get the building block there in eggs. Also, vitamin D exists in fatty fish, which I love, especially when I'm in Hawaii. Off and on throughout the year, I'm eating the fresh fish. I don't get as much when I'm on the mainland, spending time in either Utah or Florida. I've been struggling to find great places. Florida is not too bad. I've been able to get some fresh fish over there. Utah, I don't eat much fish, because it's harder to get the real fresh stuff. And I don't know, I'm kind of spoiled. I like the fresh stuff, not so much the frozen stuff. So I do supplement with vitamin D3, and I can share that with you a little bit later on. But there is some really important stuff, just basic to this vitamin, that's so critical, because it is involved in so many reactions in the body. It actually goes right into the cell, into the nucleus, which is kind of the command center, and starts turning on and turning off genes. Vitamin D is that important. It literally turns on and turns off genes in the nucleus of a cell, and it is critical. It is critical. But you know what's really important as well is that it can't work in a lot of these reactions without magnesium. And many of us are low on our magnesium as well. I talked about it a little bit last week when I talked about magnesium, calcium, and hinted about vitamin D. We need all three. Magnesium acts as a cofactor in over 600 reactions in the body, many of which involve vitamin D. They work together to turn on and turn off genes. So they are so critical. We need to make sure we are getting sufficient vitamin D and magnesium. And if you need help with that, you can reach out to me as well. I do supplement with at least 3 types of magnesium because it's so critical, I think, for our overall body function. For me, it's been super critical as well because I suffer from migraines. And I know that when I supplement, it helps tremendously. I rarely get them. And when I do, they're much more abbreviated. It also helps me to sleep at night. And thank goodness, it also works with vitamin D as a cofactor in many of these enzymatic processes, not just for ideal bony health, but for the health of your body as a whole. In fact, when levels are low of vitamin D, one of the easiest things to recognize is inflammation goes up. And if you've listened to the podcast I did, must have been a year or two ago, probably 2 years ago, on inflammation, how it is literally at the root of all disease. It is something that you do not want. And this is chronic inflammation. This is that constant smoldering fire of inflammation that not only zaps you of the energy and makes you feel like you're drained and you got no energy, but also it is sort of a factor and a force that predisposes you to all of the health problems that you can think of. Everything from heart disease to obesity, diabetes, cancer, all of these things are inflammatory based. And vitamin D is anti-inflammatory, so it works against that process. And as you get your levels up to these optimal levels, 60 to 80 nanograms per ml, your inflammation typically goes way down. So one of the best ways to get the inflammation down is to get your vitamin D up. And like I said, although it's often referred to as the sunshine vitamin, most people can't get sufficient amounts just from the sun, because it's not like back in the day, right, where we basically walked around naked and we were exposed to sunlight all day long. It's not like that. We are fully clothed most of the time, and maybe we go to the beach here and there, like I try to do, just to get outside and get my little burst 20 minutes here and there of sun exposure to hopefully get some of that vitamin D activation through the photoreceptors, soaking that through the skin cells and then getting them into the active form of the cholecalciferol or the vitamin D3. But even I, well over 40, can't do this sufficiently, and I do supplement. So most people will find that they do need to supplement, and if you don't want to, you can do your best to get it from food, but you got to check under the hood. You got to check a level. And the foods that have vitamin D are the foods that many of us don't eat, like organ meats, right? Like liver. If you eat liver, there's vitamin D there. Also in the fatty fish, as I mentioned, like the ahi tuna or salmon, whole, eggs, because you can get that in the eggs as well. Sardines, thankfully, do have some. And I just shared with you last week that I had a newfound love over at Costco. They got these sardines that are in pure extra virgin olive oil. So you get that healthy dose of olive oil. At the same time, you can get some of this vitamin D3, which is amazing. So salmon, mackerel, swordfish, tuna, which is ahi, sardines are decent sources, as well as eggs. But you got to look under the hood. You got to check. And if you don't like any of those foods, you definitely are going to find that you'll need a supplement. I eat all of those foods and I still supplement. So don't rule out the possible need for supplementation, but you got to check. You got to look under the hood and get this done. It is so critical and so important. And actually, I wanted to share with you a study. Vitamin D not only helps with decreasing inflammation, as I mentioned, which is at the root of almost every disease, including heart disease, diabetes, cancer. But actually, this got my wheels turning, because as you know, or many of you may know this, I do have a daughter that has type 1 diabetes. And it may have been that one of the factors that figured into her getting this was potentially a low vitamin D, because she is a super fair-skinned young girl, just like me. We've been living a bunch on the mainland USA lately, spending time in Florida and in Utah, and haven't been out in the sun as much as we typically are when we're in Hawaii. And so she's pretty fair skinned, not getting much from the sun. We hadn't specifically been giving her a vitamin D supplement. She was getting a kid's multivitamin, which had some in there. But one of the things that I'll talk about in just a moment is the way that you supplement is really important. It should be in one of these gel caps, a fatty, oily gel cap, and not in a tablet. Because when it's in a tablet, which is actually what she takes as a multivitamin, as a chewable kid's tablet, it's just not as well absorbed. Vitamin D, like I mentioned, it's cholesterol based. It is fat soluble. So in order to really get appropriate amounts from a supplement, it's got to be one of these fatty gel caps. A tablet ain't going to do. In fact, here's something many people don't know, but sometimes doctors even prescribe vitamin D in a tablet. And this is not the active form. That's typically vitamin D2, because it's available in prescription. And it is not the active form, and it is not as good as just the supplemental form you can get in a gel cap from your favorite supplement supplier. So vitamin D3 should come in a gel cap. It's got to be in a fatty base because it's fat soluble. If you can do D3 and K2, which is what I have already begun to get my daughter going with, which is we have drops, because she's pretty young. She can't swallow capsules or gel caps yet. Hopefully real soon we give her drops that are D3 and K2. And you guys learned last week with the D3, K2 and calcium podcast that you need those together. So we're using D3, K2 drops for her. And I just wanted to share with you this study. Let me see if I can find it, on how important, here we go, that this study was done back, it's a little older. Let me just go to the actual source here. It was in the Lancet, which is an amazing peer-reviewed reference. The Lancet from way back in 2001, it was entitled Intake of Vitamin D and Risk of Type 1 Diabetes. And so this was not something I knew prior to my daughter getting diagnosed. And I feel a little bit embarrassed. I don't know a lot of things. I know a bunch, but there's plenty of things I don't know. And I was reading this study, and it showed that you can actually decrease your incidence and risk for this was actually specifically looking at type 1 diabetes. We know type 2 is primarily something caused by, our diet misadventures, right? We're not eating the right things. We're getting overweight and obese. But type 1 diabetes has this big inflammatory component. It's considered an autoimmune disease. And one of the things that can decrease not only just general inflammation like vitamin D can, but vitamin D can also decrease autoimmune illnesses, including type 1 diabetes, including others like multiple sclerosis and rheumatoid arthritis, for example. And this particular study was looking at type 1 diabetes in the Lancet. And if you restored the levels and gave about 2,000, this one was 2,000 units per day, which is actually a small dose. That's typically like one gel cap, 2,000 units per day. The risk or the incidence for type 1 diabetes drops by as much as 88%. Another study looked at women and reducing their risk of multiple sclerosis by up to 41% and rheumatoid arthritis by 44% with supplementing with this. Actually, really, I would consider it a small dose of just 2,000 units daily of vitamin D3. And so that actually is a very low dose. I take typically around 4,000. Sometimes, depending on what my levels are, I try to get them measured about every 6 months. If they're low, I will do double that. I'll do 8,000. Sometimes those that are just starting out need to start with higher doses up to 12,000 or so to get their levels up. And it takes about 3 to 6 months. So I wouldn't do a follow-up test for a minimum of 3 months. If you get a level today and it shows that your level is less than 60, or if it's 20 or 30, I would start supplementing with probably around 8,000 at the get-go, and then measure it at about 3 months and see where you're at. But typical levels of supplementation for people like me, I take about 4,000 on average, sometimes as much as 8,000 units a day, just depending on what time of the year it is, what my levels are. And like I said, you got to check under the hood. And of course, none of this is medical advice. I am just sharing helpful, useful information. Although I am a doctor, I'm not your doctor, and I'm not giving any medical advice on this podcast, but something that I would highly encourage folks to be thinking about, to getting their levels checked. Vitamin D3 is a great thing to know, as well as a fasting insulin, which I've talked about many times before. And you may not have any specific symptoms of deficiency, because most of us, as mentioned, may have a low-ish level, which at one point may have been classified as normal, right? The lab test may say if you have a level of 25, you're fine. Although we now know that that's not fine and it's not great. In fact, during the pandemic, we saw very increased numbers of folks with deleterious effects of getting the illness that had low vitamin D levels, in the 20s, for example, that didn't do as well with the COVID-19 because of the low vitamin D levels. And if your level was above, say 40, 50, or 60, you typically didn't get severe disease. Like vitamin D is that important. It's not only important for immune health and bone health, but very, very important to get your inflammation down. And as I mentioned at the start, inflammation is basically at the base or root of almost all disease. And vitamin D is one of the best anti-inflammatory vitamins. And so super important to get appropriate vitamin D, not just for folks who are worried about bone health, which of course we all should be worried about, especially the folks like me that are in their 50th year and beyond. Like, we legit need to be worried about bone health, but all of us should care about having strong, healthy bones. And so it's not just vitamin D alone, it's vitamin D accompanied by the D3, the active form, the K2, the calcium, the magnesium, phosphorus. These are the things that we need. And I found that the most useful starting point is making sure you get your vitamin D3 levels up as well as your magnesium. And that's a great starting point. So let me share with you another issue that I found, and actually a lot of people that I didn't anticipate. And this kind of goes along with what I was sharing, not only about those that may have a pretty decent, tan, if you will, and think that, oh my gosh, my levels must be normal. Well, as you age, you don't get as efficient at converting that sunlight into making the utility of getting the vitamin D3, the active form in your body. That just doesn't happen as well as it did when you're a teenager. It just doesn't. And so even though you might have a good suntan if you're older than 40, or if you're overweight, like many of us are, up to 70 some odd % of us here in the US, that process doesn't work as well. In fact, wanted to share with you some data that I found with respect to that, that if you are overweight, it actually is super common to require double or even triple the dose of vitamin D3 to achieve the same levels. And so, like I mentioned, these folks might be starting at 10,000 or even 12,000 units a day, because the efficiency of the conversion into the active form vitamin D3 just doesn't happen as well when you are overweight. And there was, wanted to actually show you that study that mentioned that. I'm not finding it at the moment, but I will drop it later in a post. But it actually was pretty eye-opening to me, because I hadn't thought of that it just doesn't get converted into the active form as well if we're overweight. It sort of makes sense from an inflammatory process. Generally, if we are overweight, we tend to carry more inflammation. But those are the scenarios where we need vitamin D even more, right? Because as I mentioned, vitamin D is very anti-inflammatory. And so even more of a reason to be able to get our vitamin D levels up. And as mentioned, you want to make sure you have a gel cap. It's got to be in one of these fatty, oily gel caps. And thankfully, they don't smell bad like the fish oil ones. Oh my gosh, I have yet to find a really amazing smelling fish oil one, but it's just the way it is. Fish oil kind of smells, right? You want to get your omega-3 up there, your DHA and EPA. And I just kind of plug my nose and choke them down, and that's the way it goes. But fortunately for the gel caps with vitamin D3, they don't really have a bad smell or anything like that. So you want the oil-based gel cap, or like I use in my young girls, the liquid drops, the D3K2, and not in a tablet like we talked about, right? And also we always want to take the vitamin D3, or generally speaking, we want to take the vitamin D3 because it's the active form, right? The D2, which physicians prescribe sometimes, is actually not the active form. And of course, it is less effective. And then, as mentioned, you got to just look under the hood. You got to do the blood test, check your 25-hydroxy vitamin D levels, because you got to know where you're starting from. And then as you supplement, as you increase your intake, whether it be in supplementation form like I do most of the year, or you're eating a bunch of fatty fish, which caution with that, because then there's always the element of potential mercury. So I'm leaning more towards sardines in my getting my omega-3s up than I am, as I used to, in tons of fresh ahi tuna. In fact, here in Hawaii, I've been here for a couple of weeks recently, and I think I've only maybe once or twice a week. I try to eat fish twice a week when I'm here. The studies show if you eat fish at least once a week, that's helpful. And I just can't do that most of the time when I'm on the mainland, which is a lot of the time lately. And so I'm not eating a lot of fish. But even here in Hawaii, I'm not eating as much. And so I'm starting to supplement not only in Hawaii with vitamin D3, but also adding sardines for my omega-3s, for example. But thankfully, these vitamin D3 gel capsules don't smell bad like the omega-3s. So if you found one that's effective, that doesn't have any fishy odor, let me know. It's just tough to find, but it's definitely worth the effort. But you got to get the gel caps, so not the tablets, right? And it's probably not going to be sufficient just in a multivitamin, because you need it in that sort of fatty core, because that's how you're going to be able to absorb it. That's just the way it goes. Also, for those that do have bowel conditions, maybe if you have problems with either leaky gut or Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, any of the inflammatory bowel or even irritable bowel conditions where your bowels are just a little out of whack and they're not absorbing things well, you may also need higher amounts just based upon that as well, because you're going to have trouble absorbing the vitamin D just due to these bowel disorders. So more than ever, you just have to check under the hood. You got to check your level and then repeat it every 3 to 6 months. And as mentioned, you may require more than you think, especially if you're a little overweight, because the active form is not as easily made in that range. Yeah, if you need help with that, feel free to message me. If you can't get your doctor to do it, there are some labs like ZRT labs, as I mentioned, where you don't need a doctor's prescription and you can check that level. I really feel like this should be, one of the most important blood tests that get done at a doctor's office. And sadly, this is just not the case. because not only does vitamin D help with what we've already talked about, right? Increase our bone health, increase our immune health, decrease the risk of a lot of autoimmune conditions like type 1 diabetes, like thyroid disease, especially Hashimoto's. There's a big key player there. A lot of folks with low vitamin D are predisposed to Hashimoto's, as well as other autoimmune conditions like rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, et cetera, et cetera. And so getting your vitamin D levels, super important. Also, there's been lots of studies showing that if you have a higher level of vitamin D, you will also be less likely to get many of the cancers, breast cancer, prostate cancer, et cetera, as well as even the very feared condition that we all know and don't want to get, called dementia. Dementia is increased in risk for low vitamin D levels. And those that increase their intake and have vitamin D levels in this sort of ideal range, right? The 60 and up, as I mentioned, 60 to 70, 60 to 80, have a 75% less risk for developing Alzheimer's dementia, 75% less risk. And that study was from the journals of gerontology, biological sciences, and medical sciences. The title was Higher Vitamin D Intake is Associated with Lower Risk of Alzheimer's Disease. So you can't go wrong. Vitamin D3 is so important. And it's actually, thankfully, it's really inexpensive. You could hop on over there to your favorite retailer or buy it on an app, right? The little quick search, touch the button over on your favorite app, and you can literally buy this stuff, have it delivered in a couple of days. I actually just renewed. I used to be on one of these, whatever they call it, I don't know, click and save or something, where every month or something it sends you a bottle. And this was the D3K2 I was alluding to, and we had gotten low on that, and I just got a little lazy. I'm just going to be honest. Like, when you got young kids, it's not always super easy to have them take a bunch of supplements. But I was reminded of this important risk factor for type 1 diabetes if your vitamin D level is low. So I'm actually considering checking all of the kids to make sure their levels are appropriate, because in my family, now that we have one kid out of our 6 that has type 1 diabetes, there's always a chance that more could be affected, whether there be a genetic component or whatever. It might be something they have been exposed to, who knows? So I'm definitely going to be putting a lot more emphasis in making sure all of my kids have appropriate vitamin D3 levels, because it is that important. So I would encourage you as well to take a look at that in your own life, to check under the hood. I was looking, I just was curious. I had written a whole section in my book on vitamin D as well, because of course it's one of my favorite vitamins. If you have my book, it's on page 189. It's just one of my favorite things, right? I always talk about getting your vitamin M, N, and D, right? Movement, nature, and a little sunshine, right? The sunshine vitamin, or vitamin D. It's just so important. And like I said, that original study that showed 50% of us were deficient, that was using a cutoff value of 20 nanograms per ml, which is really, really low. If you're 25, that study would say you're normal. I would not say you're normal at 25. I would say you want to be, well, you may be normal based upon the levels in the population, like we talked about. Normal on a blood test is not always a good thing. Well, you want optimal. You want optimal. And that really goes with the vitamin D levels, the 25 hydroxy vitamin D. Also with like a fasting insulin, you want to be optimal. With a fasting blood sugar, you want to be optimal. Thyroid hormone levels, do you want to be optimal? And oftentimes your doctor may just look at the quote unquote normal reference range, and it's really, really broad. Like if you got a thyroid test recently and your TSH is like 1.2, you'll be like, oh, that says it's normal. Your doc's going to be like, oh, that's totally fine. I would suggest you might want it a little bit lower than that. So anyway, normal is not necessarily optimal, like in so many things, right? Because normal just means average, and we don't want to be average. We want to be high functioning, optimal health. We want to be able to do all the things that we want to do, not be held back by any health issues. And so right now, currently, if you use a cutoff value of 60 nanograms per ml, that number jumps up to almost 90% of us are lower than we should be in vitamin D3, or the 25 hydroxy vitamin D. And so just the other thing I was reading is this from the Journal of Pediatrics, that more than 70% of children are low in vitamin D. 70%. And that's, it's heartbreaking because the kids are the ones that are out in the sun. They're literally out playing all day. It's summertime. They probably all got a hefty dose of sunshine, and many of them may still be deficient. And like we know, deficiencies are linked to all sorts of problems, right? Everything from not the most optimal bone health, but from increased risk of all these inflammatory conditions, everything from diabetes, like we've talked about, especially the type 1 that's been linked to having a lower vitamin D level, as well as cardiovascular disease, that's heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's, dementia, depression. Lots of studies are showing the link between low vitamin D levels and depression. And I think that's multifactorial. Vitamin D is so critical in decreasing, right? It's an anti-inflammatory, decreasing inflammation. And we now know that depression is inflammation of the brain, as is anxiety. And to decrease that inflammation, vitamin D is so, so helpful. Plus, I would also add that just being outside and getting a little sunshine is very helpful for my mental health. In fact, the last couple of days with my foot just being twice the size of the other one, it's been frustrating because I can't do all my usual stuff outdoors and my active things. I'm trying as best I can, but it's been tough, having this big balloon on my one foot that's just not cooperating the way that I like. And so, those darn centipedes, right? But thankfully, I'd say once in 30 some odd years is not that big of a deal. But vitamin D is that critical and that important. And as I mentioned at the outset, it is different than almost all other vitamins. It literally goes straight to the nucleus of the cell, kind of acts more like a hormone than anything. It turns on, it turns off genes. In fact, in my book, I quote a study saying that it's involved in over 1,000 genes being turned on and turned off. I mean, it's crazy. It is crazy. And you may not be able to get it just from your diet because most of us aren't eating beef liver, right? We're not eating organ meats, or maybe we're not eating very much fish, or like I mentioned, the sardines, right? How many of you are having sardines regularly, right? Maybe you don't eat them because you don't like the smell, or maybe your spouse or partner doesn't like it. And I just brush my teeth real good afterwards. My wife, I know she doesn't like it, but hey, I'm trying to have optimal health so I can be around for her, for my kids, be in my optimal health, and make sure that you just check under the hood, because you got to know what you're up against. And then, like I said, a starting point for most people is about 2,000 international units, which is equivalent to about 50 micrograms. But most people will need a higher dose, 5,000 to 10,000, to get your levels up. And then when you retest, probably wait about 3 months to retest, because it takes a while to obtain what we call an equilibrium or a steady state. So I hope with this podcast, you have just top, front, and center the desire to go out, number one, and just check under the hood, get your vitamin D3 level, which is the 25 hydroxy vitamin D, get that level checked, because you'd be surprised. I would be willing to bet many of us have levels below 60, and 60 is sort of that optimal level. And 20 ain't gonna cut it. Even though the lab may say you're normal at 20, I would encourage you to get your level up to 60. And like I said, repeat it every 3 to 6 months, because not only will it help with your bone health, but your immune health. It will help make you more resilient, as we are having cough, cold, and flu season coming up just around the corner. And here's one that I hadn't thought about, but it can even help you potentially lose weight. There was a study reported in the International Journal of Preventive Medicine showing that after 6 weeks of vitamin D supplementation in the intervention group, this was an actual randomized controlled trial, the highest level of evidence in RCT, and they gave one group vitamin D supplementation and one group didn't get it. And the group that got it had significantly more weight loss, in addition to significant decreases in their waist and hip circumference, their BMI, compared to the group without the supplemental vitamin D. So another reason to get that vitamin D up. It may even help you lose weight, but I guarantee you, you will not regret getting that level optimized in that 60 plus range, 60 to 70 or so, because it'll benefit you in so many ways. It is so key to decreasing inflammation. And like I mentioned, if you have questions or you want to reach out to me to see how you can get tested or how you can supplement, what supplements I take, I'd be happy to share that with you. Easiest place to find me over on Instagram at Dr. Thomas Hemingway. That's Dr. Thomas Hemingway. You can even email me. You can even email me at aloha alohasurfdoc@gmail. That used to be my Instagram handle. I still got that email, alohasurfdoc@gmail.com. You can email me over there, or just drop a message to me, a DM, either on Instagram, Facebook, wherever you use or have social media. I'm there on all platforms, Dr. Thomas Hemingway, Dr. Thomas Hemingway. And make sure that you share this episode with somebody that you love and care about, because it is so crucial that they know about this important vitamin. It's not just that kind of fun summertime sunshine vitamin, but it is so critical to our health. As I mentioned, it is active in thousands of genes. It actually governs whether they get turned on or turned off. It works together with magnesium. So make sure your magnesium is also sufficient. I supplement both magnesium, vitamin D3, also K2. I don't specifically take a calcium supplement for reasons that hopefully you found out last week, because now that I'm taking these others, I can absorb the appropriate calcium that I need. And so I don't take additional calcium, but make sure you're getting enough vitamin D3, K2, and of course, the mighty mineral magnesium. So I hope you've learned something with this show, and I hope you'll share it out on your social, tag me, send me a message, drop a review. I read every single one. I just love to see those. So keep them coming in. Share this, share the book, Preventable: 5 Powerful Practices to Avoid Disease and Build Unshakable Health. Make sure you drop a review over there on Amazon as well, so more people can hear about it and get the word. I actually did a whole section on vitamin D and a whole section on supplements there. If you want to get a little bit more into the weeds and know what I recommend people take, we'll take a look at that chapter on supplements. And until next time, a big aloha. Thanks for watching, and remember to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell so you never miss out. Aloha.